Kill your ego before it kills you. The Stoic IronMind Way, the enemy inside your head. The ego is the one enemy you protect without realizing it. It's the voice that demands validation, hides weakness, rejects truth, and disguises insecurity as confidence. The ego convinces you that you're improving while you're actually avoiding the real work. It prefers illusion over growth because illusion feels safe, but safety is where the mind decays. Every fragile decision you've made began with the ego whispering that discomfort is beneath you, humility is unnecessary, and responsibility is optional. If you don't confront this voice, it becomes your executioner. Marcus Aurelius warned himself daily to stay small before truth. Epictetus insisted that arrogance is the prison of fools. Nietzsche dissected the ego as the weight that prevents transcendence. Jung saw it as the mask that hides the shadow until the shadow takes control. Viktor Frankl observed that survival itself depends on the courage to detach from ego and see reality without filters. The ego is ancient. It lives in your fear of judgment, in your need to be right, in your obsession with being seen. But the more you defend it, the more it devours you from within. Your ego is why you get offended easily. It's why you procrastinate. It's why you avoid difficult conversations. It's why you collapse under pressure. The ego is allergic to accountability, allergic to correction, allergic to silence. It is the part of you that prefers praise over progress, image over identity, reaction over reason. And until you kill it, it will kill your discipline, your clarity, your relationships, your potential, and your direction in life. The Stoics weren't humble for moral reasons. They were humble for practical survival. They knew that a swollen ego blinds you. It makes you misjudge your abilities, underestimate challenges, ignore warning signs, and reject feedback that could save you. The ego kills long before you notice the symptoms. It hides the truth behind emotional noise. It blinds you to your own patterns. It convinces you that you're the exception to every principle, and the worst part is that it feels righteous while destroying you. Killing the ego is not self-hatred, it is self-liberation. When you strip away the inner noise, you gain something far more valuable than confidence, self-command. You become someone who can see reality clearly, act without performance, and stand firm without needing applause. You stop defending illusions and start building strength. You stop pretending to be the person you want to be and start becoming the person you were meant to be. This process is uncomfortable, but discomfort is the birthplace of truth. This video will take you through 8 philosophical blows, habits, warnings, and confrontations that crush the ego before it crushes you. Each chapter exposes a different illusion. The ego feeds on and replaces it with clarity, discipline, and psychological sovereignty. This is not a motivational message. This is a dismantling, a demolition of the inner architecture that keeps you small. If you want to grow, something inside you must die. The ego won't leave quietly. It will fight, resist, negotiate. But every time you choose humility over pride, discipline over comfort, truth over image, you tighten the grip on the one enemy that has lived inside your mind unchecked. Kill your ego, or it will kill everything you could have been. The ego's first lie: you are already enough. The ego's most dangerous lie is not arrogance. It is complacency. The quiet claim that you are already enough, already wise, already strong, already disciplined. It sounds comforting, but comfort is the birthplace of decay. When the ego convinces you that you've arrived, you stop evolving. You stop questioning. You stop sharpening. And a mind that stops sharpening begins to rot long before the world notices. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders, not because he was weak, but because he knew the ego grows fastest in those who believe they have nothing left to learn. Seneca warned that pride blinds a man to his own chains. Modern psychology confirms this. When the mind believes it is complete, it rejects new information, ignores feedback, and becomes trapped inside its own illusions. The ego turns stagnation into identity. You are not enough. Not yet. Not if you still collapse under emotion, hesitate under pressure, or choose comfort over clarity. Not if fear still negotiates your decisions. Not if your impulses still rule your reactions. The truth is simple and brutal. The person you are today is not the person you need to become, and pretending otherwise is the ego's trap. Ego thrives on the illusion of completion because completion removes responsibility. If you're already enough, there's no need to face your weaknesses, no need to admit your mistakes, no need to confront your patterns, no need to evolve. But a life without evolution becomes a life ruled by the lowest parts of you. Jung warned that the ego builds walls to shelter you from truth, but those walls eventually become your cage. Killing the ego begins with destroying the illusion of enough. You acknowledge that your mind needs discipline, your emotions need training, your habits need reconstruction, your awareness needs sharpening. This isn't self-loathing, it's self-honesty, the kind of honesty that frees you from the false comfort that neutralizes ambition. Schopenhauer called this clarity the first step toward liberation from self-deception. Frankl called it responsibility toward one's potential. Epictetus called it the beginning of wisdom. The ego wants you to fear insufficiency, but insufficiency is not weakness, it is direction. It is the compass pointing you toward who you must become. When you stop pretending you're enough, you finally begin building, you finally begin learning, you finally begin rising. The ego tells you to protect your image. The Stoic mind tells you to confront your reality. And reality is the only place transformation happens. The lie is dead now. The work begins here. The mask you wear. How the ego hides your weakness. The ego survives through disguise. It never shows itself directly. It uses masks, confidence, humor, superiority, detachment, anything that hides the parts of you that are fragile, afraid, or unfinished. The ego's goal is simple. Protect your image at all costs, even if it destroys your growth. And it works, because most people would rather appear strong than become strong. Jung called this mask the persona, the performance you create to avoid confronting your shadow. Seneca warned that people spend more effort looking virtuous than becoming virtuous. Nietzsche saw the mask as the greatest barrier to transformation because it allows mediocrity to feel noble. Modern psychology explains it as self-deception. The brain lies to protect your identity from discomfort. You act confident to hide insecurity. You act indifferent to hide fear. You act knowledgeable to hide ignorance. You act busy to hide undisciplined habits. You act tough to hide emotional fragility. None of this makes you strong. It only makes you exhausted. The mask becomes heavy because every performance must be maintained. You start living for perception instead of truth. You waste your energy trying to control how others see you instead of controlling how you behave. And a life spent performing is a life disconnected from reality. The ego convinces you that image is power, but image is the lowest form of power, fragile, temporary, dependent on applause. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Do not be caught pretending." He understood that the mask dissolves courage. Epictetus demanded that students reveal their flaws before trying to fix them. Frankl emphasized that meaning requires authenticity, and authenticity requires confronting the parts of yourself you want to hide. You cannot kill the ego while protecting the mask it wears. You cannot grow while preserving the identity that keeps you small. You cannot build strength while performing weakness disguised as confidence. Look at the mask you wear. Ask yourself who you are without it. The answer will scare you. Good. Fear is clarity. When the mask breaks, the work begins. When the work begins, the ego loses power. And when the ego loses power, the mind becomes free to rise. The persona dies, so the person is born. The ego's addiction to control. Why you can't let go. The ego doesn't just fear weakness. It fears anything it cannot command. It clings to control even when control is impossible. It demands that people think a certain way, treat you a certain way, speak about you a certain way. It demands that life cooperate with your expectations. And when reality refuses, as it always does, the ego collapses into anger, anxiety, or victimhood. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations to remind himself of one truth. You control your actions, not the world. Epictetus went further, insisting that suffering comes from trying to control what was never yours. Modern psychology echoes this. The mind becomes unstable when it attaches identity to outcomes instead of effort. Nietzsche warned that the ego's obsession with control is actually fear disguised as authority. The ego hates uncertainty, so it invents illusions of control. You overthink because you fear the unknown. You cling to people because you fear abandonment. You chase validation because you fear irrelevance. You avoid risks because you fear losing the illusion of competence. You lash out because you fear feeling powerless. The ego wants a world that bends to your preferences. The disciplined mind adapts to reality. Without complaint, control is not power. Self-control is power. Everything else is ego theater. When you try to control people, you become manipulative. When you try to control outcomes, you become anxious. When you try to control perception, you become fragile. When you try to control the uncontrollable, you become chaotic inside. The ego's hunger for control blinds you to the only command you truly have, your own mind. Jung said that the greatest form of power is the ability to confront the chaos within. Frankl taught that freedom begins in the gap between stimulus and response. The Stoics demanded that you focus your energy only where your will has jurisdiction, your effort, your choices, your discipline, your inner state. Kill the ego by surrendering the illusion. Stop trying to control people. Stop trying to control outcomes. Stop trying to control the story others tell. Focus on controlling the one force that can reshape your entire life, your response. When you give up fake control, you gain real power. Power over your impulses, power over your reactions, power over your identity. The ego tightens its grip by making you chase the impossible. The Stoic mind rises by mastering the essential. Release what was never yours. Command what always was. The ego feeds on comparison, the poison that weakens your mind. The ego cannot survive without comparison. It needs someone to feel above, someone to feel below, someone to measure, someone to resent. It demands a hierarchy where you are always the center. But the moment your worth depends on where you stand relative to others, your identity becomes unstable. Comparison is not just envy. It is self-inflicted psychological violence. Seneca warned that nothing destroys peace faster than measuring your life by someone else's progress. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that another person's success has no power over his purpose. Modern psychology shows that comparison triggers the brain's threat system, weakening motivation while increasing anxiety and self-doubt. Nietzsche saw comparison as the death of authentic becoming, the ego obsessing over how it appears instead of what it is becoming. The ego compares because it cannot tolerate silence. It cannot tolerate self-honesty. It needs distraction from the truth of your current state. So it searches for someone to envy or judge. Both serve the same purpose, avoiding responsibility. You envy those ahead, so you don't have to confront your lack of discipline. You judge those behind, so you don't have to confront your lack of humility. Comparison makes you reactive instead of intentional. Your goals shift. Your values distort. Your confidence becomes dependent on others failing. Your progress slows because you are busy watching instead of building. The ego wants you to compete with everyone except your former self. It wants you trapped in a race that has no finish line, chasing validation instead of mastery. Jung warned that comparing yourself to others disconnects you from your inner path. Frankl insisted that meaning is personal and cannot be borrowed from another life. Epictetus taught that you must judge yourself only by what lies within your control, your effort, your discipline, your character. Kill the ego by redirecting comparison inward. Compare who you are today to who you were yesterday. Compare your habits, not your status. Compare your discipline, not your appearance. Compare your courage, not your applause. The mind becomes resilient when it stops competing for approval and starts competing for integrity. You don't need to outrun anyone. You need to outrun the weaker version of yourself. When the ego loses comparison, it loses oxygen. When comparison dies, clarity returns. You rise when you stop measuring and start becoming. The ego craves validation, the hunger that makes you weak. The ego wants one thing above all, to be seen, not understood, not improved, just seen. It feeds on attention the way a fire feeds on oxygen. The more it gets, the bigger it grows, and the bigger it grows, the weaker you become. Because validation doesn't make you stronger, it makes you dependent, addicted, responsive to applause but paralyzed without it. The ego convinces you that external approval is proof of worth, but worth built on other people's reactions collapses the moment they stop clapping. Seneca wrote that the person who lives for praise dies when it is denied. Marcus Aurelius warned himself never to allow admiration to distort his judgment. Modern psychology shows that people with a validation-driven identity suffer from emotional instability, reactive behavior, and chronic insecurity. Jung called validation a substitute for real selfhood, a fragile mask replacing a grounded inner life. You chase likes because you fear being unseen. You chase compliments because you fear being inadequate. You chase attention because you fear being insignificant. You chase status because you fear being ordinary. The ego is terrified of silence because silence forces you to face who you are without an audience. And if your worth shatters in silence, you never had worth, only applause. Nietzsche said that the need for approval is the surest sign of inner poverty. Frankl argued that meaning comes from living truthfully, not impressively. Epictetus taught that the person who depends on others for validation is a slave, because their peace is owned by someone else. Validation is emotional sugar, sweet now, poison later. The ego tells you that you need recognition to feel real, but recognition is unstable. It changes with trends, with moods, with crowds, with algorithms, with the fragile opinions of fragile people. Building your identity around validation is like building a house on water. Impressive for a moment, then gone without warning. Kill the ego by starving its hunger. Stop announcing your goals. Stop fishing for compliments. Stop letting opinions dictate your actions. Stop performing your life as if someone is grading it. Do the work quietly. Build your strength without broadcasting it. Earn self-respect instead of attention. Validation becomes irrelevant when you can look at your discipline, your character, your mind, and know exactly who you are without applause. You become unbreakable when you no longer need the world to confirm your worth. A person who does not crave validation cannot be manipulated. A person who does not chase approval cannot be controlled. When validation dies, authenticity is born, and authenticity is where real strength begins. The ego hates accountability, the truth that breaks its spine. The ego can survive discomfort, criticism, and failure, but it cannot survive accountability. Accountability is the blade that cuts through every illusion the ego builds. It forces you to confront the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. It exposes the excuses you protect, the habits you defend, the fantasies you cling to. Accountability is truth with teeth, and truth is the natural predator of the ego. Marcus Aurelius wrote reminders as confessions, not to an audience but to himself. He understood that self-governance requires brutal honesty. Seneca argued that a man who cannot examine himself is unfit to lead even his own mind. Epictetus demanded daily self-audits, because awareness without accountability is just philosophical entertainment. Modern psychology calls accountability the engine of behavioral change, the moment excuses collapse and responsibility begins. Nietzsche saw accountability as the starting point of personal sovereignty. Jung described it as the courage to face the shadow instead of projecting it onto others. The ego avoids accountability through three predictable strategies: blame, denial, rationalization. You blame circumstances so you don't have to change. You deny responsibility so you don't have to grow. You rationalize failure so you don't have to confront your habits. Every time you refuse accountability, you reinforce the weakest parts of yourself. You train the mind to escape instead of evolve. You feed the illusion that your problems are external instead of internal. This is how the ego kills you, slowly, quietly, with your permission. Accountability feels harsh because it removes your last defense. It takes away the option to pretend. It leaves you alone with your choices, your discipline, your behavior, your results. But this is where transformation begins. Frankl said that responsibility is the essence of meaning. Without responsibility, the self dissolves into impulses. With responsibility, the self becomes coherent. Kill the ego by embracing accountability at every level. Own your reactions, own your discipline, own your inconsistencies, own your failures without dramatizing them, own your progress without boasting, own your habits because your habits build your fate. Accountability is not punishment, it is power. It gives you the authority to rewrite your patterns instead of repeating them. It gives you clarity where the ego breeds confusion. It gives you direction where the ego breeds chaos. It gives you identity where the ego breeds performance. A person who seeks accountability becomes unmanipulable, both by others and by themselves. A person who avoids accountability becomes a hostage to their ego. Choose which one you become. The ego fears humility, the gateway to real power. Humility is not softness. Humility is not weakness. Humility is not submission. Humility is the quiet strength of a mind that refuses to lie to itself, and that is exactly why the ego hates it. The ego survives by exaggerating your strengths and hiding your flaws. Humility destroys both illusions at once. It forces you to see your incompetence without collapsing. It forces you to see your progress without inflating. It forces you to stand in truth without needing applause. Marcus Aurelius prayed not to be a king of words, but a servant of reality. Epictetus insisted that humility is the beginning of wisdom, because only a humble mind can learn. Nietzsche, who despised false modesty, still understood that becoming stronger requires kneeling before the truth. Jung warned that without humility, a person becomes possessed by their shadow, blind to the forces that actually control them. Modern psychology shows that humility increases learning, resilience, and emotional regulation because it removes the need to perform. Humility is power because it frees you from illusion. You can admit mistakes without crumbling. You can accept correction without defensiveness. You can grow without waiting for permission. The ego sees humility as humiliation. The Stoic mind sees humility as liberation. Humility is the force that lets you say, I don't know enough. I can do better. I was wrong. I need discipline. I am not the center. This honesty is terrifying to the ego because it removes the fantasy of perfection. But perfection was never your purpose. Growth is. Humility aligns you with what actually strengthens you, not what flatters you. It strips away the false armor of ego-driven pride and replaces it with real armor, character, wisdom, clarity, and self-respect. The ego wants to appear strong. Humility makes you strong. The ego wants to be admired. Humility makes you admirable. The ego wants to win arguments. Humility helps you win your inner war. Humility does not make you passive. It makes you precise. It makes you dangerous in the right way, disciplined, steady, aware, and immune to the emotional storms that shatter egocentric minds. A person who kneels before truth cannot be knocked down by lies. A person who accepts their limits becomes limitless in potential. Kill the ego with humility, not with shame, not with guilt, with clarity, with honesty, with the simple courage to say, I am a work in progress, and that makes me powerful. Humility is the doorway. Walk through it, and the ego no longer owns you. The death of the ego, where your real self begins. The ego dies loud. It never leaves gently. It fights, bargains, threatens, pleads. It tries to convince you that without it, you will disappear. That without its stories, its image, its performance, you are nothing. But this is the final lie. You are not the ego. You are the awareness beneath it. You are the discipline that corrects it. You are the clarity that replaces it. The ego is the noise. You are the one who hears it. When the ego weakens, you will feel fear, not because you are breaking, but because you are finally stepping out of a prison you thought was home. Jung wrote that dissolving the ego feels like death because a part of you is dying, the part built on illusion. Nietzsche warned that growth requires the death of the old self. Frankl taught that meaning begins where ego ends. The Stoics lived this truth. When the ego dies, virtue begins. There is a moment in every transformation where you must decide whether you want comfort or identity. Comfort protects the ego. Identity demands its death. The ego will remind you of every insecurity, every failure, every humiliation. Trying to reclaim authority, it will tempt you to return to comparison, validation, performance, and control. But you are no longer fooled. You've seen its patterns. You've seen the cost. You've seen the life it creates. Reactive, fragile, noisy, chaotic. Kill the ego by choosing discipline over impulse. Kill the ego by choosing truth over pride. Kill the ego by choosing responsibility over excuses. Kill the ego by choosing purpose over appearance. Kill the ego by choosing silence over performance. Kill the ego by choosing growth over image. This death is not destruction. It is rebirth. When the ego collapses, what remains is a mind capable of clarity under pressure, humility in growth, responsibility in action, and strength without performance. A mind that cannot be manipulated by comparison, praise, fear, or noise. A mind anchored in purpose, not perception. Without the ego, you become someone who does not break when criticized, who does not panic when unseen, who does not crumble when challenged. You become someone who is moved by meaning, not mood. Someone who respects truth more than comfort. Someone who rises not because others applaud, but because it is their nature to rise. This is where the Stoic iron mind is born, not in pride, but in awareness, not in image, but in discipline, not in noise, but in stillness. The ego is loud because it is weak. The mind beyond ego is quiet because it is strong. Let the ego die. Let the illusions fall. Let the false self burn. In the ashes, You will meet the person you were always meant to become. Cold philosophy, unbreakable mind. This is the Stoic IronMind Way.